Okay, my friends, I am coming at you with another process video, and today I am sharing one of my favorite ways to utilize watercolors when I am creating florals. I'm using my favorite watercolors, the Koi Sketch Box today, and I've got a couple of different just random round brushes that I enjoy using, and then a few of my favorite pens that I will use later on down the road in this video. Now, if you take my classes, especially if you take my classes in person, this is one of the ways that I like to teach how to create a surface filled with a floral design. And that is starting with the most technical term ever, and that is creating blobs of color. So this is what I love to do. Oftentimes I get asked, which comes first, the drawings or the color? And I like to mix it up throughout the different sessions that I create in. But one of my favorite things to do is to start with messy color, specifically these messy blobs of color. So what I'm basically doing is picking my favorite colors, utilizing those watercolors, and just going into my surface and creating what looks like a blob of color. Circles, messy brush strokes here and there, and really filling that surface with that color. And once it dries, then I draw over the top of it, and I really utilize all of those organic shapes that I create within that messy color. So this process really leans on your color choices. It leans on expression and getting kind of imperfect and embracing that creativity in the moment. I'm not looking to paint a perfect flower in this process. I am literally just getting color on that surface. So then once it dries, I can go back in and transform these messy blobs of color into those florals. So something I like to do is just really channel inspiration in my real life, my garden, flowers, bouquets, things that I have. And I like to think of this process the way you would if you were to look at a bouquet of flowers and squint really hard. It's gonna look like a fuzzy ball of color or a big colorful blob. And that's what I want you to think about if you want to try this process, is just channeling that type of inspiration. You're not trying to paint out that flower initially. You're not trying to get that shape perfect. In fact, I say the more imperfect and expressive, wonky, crazy, wild, messy that you can go, the better, because this is going to give you a lot of really interesting shapes that you can work from as you go back into these watercolor layers. And for me, my goal is to try to fill as much of that space as possible when I'm working through a process like this. I like to just fill it with different colors, different really simple, messy shapes, lots of blobs of bright color, lots of expressive brush strokes here and there. My only goal is to get that surface filled. And this is kind of what I call a 2-for-1 deal. The beginning of this process is very expressive and messy. It's channeling color. And then as we add layers to it with drawing and outlining things, you can really hone in and get more detailed. So this is one of my favorite ways to work because I can be really expressive and messy at the beginning, and then I can go back in calmly, slowly, quietly over a session or even a number of days and begin working real methodically over the top of all that expressive color. So once things are dry, you can then draw right over the top of stuff. I've got some really great blobs happening in here. I've got some really great shapes, and this is when I grab my favorite pens and tools and work over the top of it. So I've got a micron in a size 8. I've got a couple of different Sharpie pens, and then I've got my favorite white pen, which is a white Uniball Signo. And I just want to tell you guys, it doesn't matter what kind of pens you use. Grab your favorites. You don't need something special to do this. These are just the favorites that I tend to use over and over again. And here's where things get really fun. This is when you can go back in and start outlining and adding details to these shapes. So what I like to do is to really make use of all those organic, messy, wonky shapes and blobs and start outlining them with my black pen. My black pen is kind of my favorite tool. I just love kind of more of an illustrative style. That would be the way that I enjoy working, where I do a lot of line work. I outline things, I add details with those lines and with those pens. And so this process is no different from me sitting down and drawing. But what I really love is that you can play around with those shapes and those messy blobs and areas of color as a way to kind of trace around as a beginning or as a starting point, and then really start adding lines and details to those flowers and work your way across the surface. And what you're going to notice as I work is that a lot of the things on my surface, they're not very intricate. I have not spent a lot of time getting that color of those flowers perfect. The petals are not all the same shape or even the right shape. They are quite wonky again, very imperfect. But through the use of outlining and adding lines to those shapes, I'm able to really bring a lot of this stuff on my surface to life. And what I enjoy doing is literally working my way from shape to shape and transforming it with my pens and that line work into a floral. But these florals are a lot different than a lot of the other stuff I create because I'm really leaning on the shapes that have emerged from those watercolor blobs and those messy splotches and areas of color. I'm outlining things that are maybe oblong or strangely shaped. I'm trying to make use of that space on that surface. I love working this way because it actually forces me to let go of a plan. Instead, I'm kind of following where the blobs of color and the shapes take me. Again, none of them are going to look or feel perfectly centered. A lot of them are oblong, kind of weirdly shaped, and that's what I really love about it, because oftentimes when I start out with a drawing, especially with florals, I'm wanting to get things relatively correct. I'm wanting to get them the way that I feel like they should be, and I spend a lot of time, getting the petals right and getting them to match up and getting a round flower perfectly round. But this is such a fun way to let go of those expectations because you kind of just follow the color and the outlines of all that messy color on that page. So what I'm going to do is let you guys watch me start working my way across the surface, going from blob to blob, adding details, adding a little bit of white pen, black pen, and working throughout all those different splotches of color to create a surface filled with a whole bunch of florals that look and feel by the end quite like a pattern or some really interesting surface design happening. And I'm hoping that by sharing this process, it inspires some of you out there to maybe play around with mixing up the order in which you create, maybe starting with something expressive, colorful, and messy, and then letting those shapes and the organic quality of those watercolors and that color kind of lead the way as opposed to beginning with a plan. So I'm going to go from blob to blob and transform it into a floral. I like to pull from both my real life and flowers in my real life and also from my imagination. So a lot of these shapes are going to be a little bit oddly shaped, and I'm just going to go with it. Use my imagination, use inspiration, and just transform each and every area of color into something that looks like a flower, and the entire surface is going to be transformed into something with lots of detail, lots of interest and contrast, and it's just a really fun way to work and let go of those expectations and instead kind of follow your intuition and really play around with shapes and how you can use your creativity to transform those shapes.